Joseph Noor joins me, and you could learn what his team is up to by going to ownwell.com. That's going to be a clickable link in the show notes. Again, it's ownwell.com. I really appreciate your time, Joseph, as we talk about how people are overpaying on their taxes.
That's right. Glad to be here, Jack.
Could you kind of give us the truncated version of like how did you find your way to this?
Yeah, sure. So my co-founder was an asset manager at a family office, and they invested heavily in real estate because you can get a great return there. And one of the things that they did was they were constantly appealing their property taxes. Minimize your expenses, maximize the ROI, makes you look like a better investor. He thought at the time that it was kind of wild that a billionaire's fund was taking advantage of this system that the average American doesn't. And so when I met him, he had this idea that we could democratize that expertise, that access to everyone. And when I met him, it was at school. We were at UCLA. He was doing his MBA. I was doing my PhD, and he pitched this idea. And it really resonated with me. I loved the idea. I was studying computer science at the time, but my family's background is in real estate. My father's a real estate investor and now an Ownwell customer. My whole family is really in the real estate industry. And I always thought it was almost a violation of my ancestry to go into technology and being involved in the real estate space. And so being presented with this opportunity of trying to help people that don't realize that they're overpaying on their property taxes and to build a software in the system to help them reclaim their savings really appealed to me. And so I met him and we got started. And basically, we started analyzing real estate. Essentially, property taxes are levied at the county level, right? So every county, all the 3,000 counties in the US, have to decide every single year how much all of the real estate in their county is worth. And then based on the property tax rate, they levy the property taxes. And some of these are fairly small offices. There's lots of different parcels for them to assess. And so they use these models, these kind of simplistic models. Some of them are 20 plus years old to kind of do like a best fit or approximate approach. And that can lead to gaps. Right? So if they're kind of doing approximations based on square footage, based on land size, based on neighborhood, and so on, they can't get super high fidelity in their accuracy of the value of real estate. And so what we do is we just take a slightly finer grained approach. We make sure that we are analyzing that real estate to its fullest extent. And when we see that there's a case and one of those property owners signs with us, we actually have a team of people that prepare that evidence, file that evidence, and attend a hearing to negotiate on behalf of the property owner and try to lower that assessment. By lowering that assessment, we then lower their property taxes and save them some money.
This is really interesting. So, you're kind of a one-stop shop for it. You've mentioned now that you do the analysis and then you even send representation.
That's right.
Like, are you in all 50 states doing this?
No, so we're very focused and targeted. Our thought process is we'd rather be experts in a particular geography and really know and have that relationship with the county assessor and have those reps and kind of understand the market deeply. And so we're targeted in 7 states. And even within those 7 states, we're actually focused on particular geographies. So we're in Washington State, we're in California, we're in Texas, we're in Florida, Georgia, New York, and Illinois. So the states that we tend to operate in tend to be higher property tax rate or higher value typically, or some combination of the two. But we're kind of more focused in our thought, and we want to be very good in the geographies that we operate in.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, are you eventually planning on expanding this?
Yeah, we expand, and there's a new state every few months that we're like, oh, should we move into whatever the major metro is in that particular state or something like that. And over time, as we see that we build those relationships and we have our people in that market that understand the local market, they can advocate on behalf of the owner, and we slowly start to expand out in that particular state.
So, I imagine you'd have to have a pretty sizable boots on the ground. Are they like actually in those states, in those counties?
Yeah, it's not as effective if they're calling in from Washington State for a Florida property, right? No, we're actually physically located everywhere that we decide to establish a new market.
So according to your website, 86% receive a reduction. You show the average savings. It sounds like you got quite the traction here regarding some of this. I even see it's $10 billion in total assessment reductions.
Just crossed that threshold. I was very excited when that happened, and I said, "We need to publish that."
Yeah, that's crazy. So on average here, how far off are some of these taxes? I mean, and do you is there a threshold
Yeah,
of a customer where it's going to make sense or not to engage your team?
totally. I like to think about this as like imagine like a scatter plot. And imagine like one axis is like the size of the home, let's say, if we're talking about just a single family home. And imagine the y axis is like the value. And in general, you're going to see it move like up and to the right, right? That as a property is worth more, or sorry, as a property is larger, it tends to be worth a little bit more. But it's not going to be a perfect line, right? It's going to be like this general scatter plot. And oftentimes, what these assessment methodologies will use is like a best fit line approach. So they'll kind of just like slap a best fit line. And so if we have this general scatter plot, you're going to have some true values that are going to be brought down to that best fit line, and you're going to have some values that are brought up to that best fit line. And those are going to be properties that are going to be underassessed and overassessed respectively, right? And so we're basically just looking for those properties that are kind of being brought to the best fit that are going to be overassessed. And then the second part you asked is kind of what do the reductions look like and how common is it that you can obtain those reductions? And we've learned that that's highly dependent on the particular market, highly dependent on the assessor and even the state tax code. Right? So each state has their own legislation that they pass as to how these taxes are meant to be levied, and they kind of govern them independently. And some states are much more favorable to offering reductions. Some states are not so favorable. And so
Mhm.
that threshold is really dependent. I'll give you an example. In the Texas tax code, property tax code, you cannot increase the value of an assessment with an appeal. And so you can only go down. And so because of that, we're much more aggressive in whether or not we choose to pursue an appeal in Texas. In other states, we are more careful because we know that we certainly don't want to create a negative outcome. And so we're always very much more guarded and much more um, we would only be willing to appeal if we were significantly more confident than in another scenario.
So you are obviously the technical brains behind all of this. Like, how are you finding and how are you retrieving this data? Where is it all coming from? I mean, this is you have to be there must be a considerable amount of connection points here that you're
Totally.
pulling in for this analysis.
Absolutely. It kind of like I mentioned, each state has their own tax code and that really governs what would be the most compelling approach or the most compelling argument that you can make in that particular geography. One that works universally is kind of like the sales comparable approach, where you look for nearby sales of similar property, and that indicates what true value should be. And so oftentimes what we're doing is simply analyzing the market. How has the real estate market changed recently? What do recent sales look like? If it's a slightly larger home or a slightly smaller home, those have to be adjusted out. And this is all tied back to basic property appraisal theory. At the end of the day, it really all comes to basic appraisal theory, and we're just taking a more fine grained analytical approach. So instead of doing like these sweeping averages where we kind of bring properties to the best fit line, we're looking at every single individual property. And we write algorithms that have run on the entire country that are looking at all the sales that we see. We spend all day collecting, aggregating, and analyzing data and taking a look at every single property, all the cases that are considered valid in that particular geography. Do we see an opportunity for savings? Do we see that this property is likely overassessed? And if you really think about it, at the end of the day, it's just about getting to the fair value, about making sure that you are paying no more than your fair share, similar to your neighbor. And that's really at the end what we're looking to.
Well, it seems like depending on the inspector, it can be if that person had a bad day, it could
Yeah.
impact your assessment. And to have this type of thing as kind of a little redundancy is probably a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes, they miss certain key things. Like if there's a hole in your roof, that is an incredibly expensive expense that lowers the ultimate value of that property if it was to go sell. And if there's really any
Right.
damage or anything that just isn't tip top shape, at the end of the day, they're comparing your property to, you know, refurbished or brand new construction. And they're using that as the comparable by which they dictate the changes in the market. And so oftentimes as part of our process, if somebody were to sign up with us and we were to analyze their property, there's a chance for you to essentially provide any circumstances that are different than maybe just like the average, clean, perfect home. And that's very useful in us trying to negotiate a lower value.
So it sounds like mostly we're talking about single family homes right now. Do you do multifamily as well?
We do, absolutely. I would say that the bulk of our users or the bulk of our clients are single family homeowners, people like myself that just own their own home and that's it. They're not necessarily the most sophisticated real estate investor. Part of that is just that, that's who we think needs this platform. It's part of the reason why we chose this specific pricing model that we chose, where we offer essentially no upfront cost and it's entirely contingency based. So for every dollar that we put in your pocket, we ask you to pay us a quarter and no more. And the idea being that if we aren't able to actually achieve savings for you, then it's an entirely free service. And the reason that model resonates with me is that I think it just aligns our incentives perfectly with our client. Our objective is to maximize your savings and to get you to reap as much benefit as you possibly can. And that coincidentally happens to also be the best possible outcome for us as well.
Hmm. And also explains why you're focused on some of the areas you are, because let's just face it, California, New York, those properties, they're the cost of properties in those areas are extremely high, and I'm
Sure.
sure the taxes are also extremely high,
Exceptionally high. Yeah, that's exactly right.
exceptionally high. Yeah. So outside of taxes, is there anything else that your team or platform helps save money on?
That's actually something that I learned early on, when we first got started and we would be filing these appeals, we'd be attending these hearings and trying to attain reductions for our clients. And oftentimes, I was answering the phone at the time. Nowadays, we have an amazing team that is much more pleasant on the phone than I'm sure I am. But at the time when they would call me up and I'd answer the phone, they said, "It's amazing. You saved me $2,000. Thank you so much. What else can you do for me? This is my focus right now, but I'll get back to you." And so it's been something that I think about all the time is, what else can we do? And so we actually recently launched a insurance comparison tool that actually takes your home insurance, whatever your policy is, whatever your premium is, whatever your deductible is, and it essentially scans that across a bunch of major insurance providers continuously in the background. So it's constantly fetching quotes. What would it look like if you were to switch? And whenever we see that there's an opportunity to save, whether that's because you'll get a better rate or whether that's because you have a lower premium or a better deductible, so on and so forth, kind of always doing that analysis in the background. So we recently launched that. And my thought process generally is what I would love to build at the end of the day is an advocate for the average American homeowner that is constantly analyzing every single expense associated with your real estate and providing you an opportunity to save whenever we see that there is something there. And so, you can kind of think of it like, just a tool that runs in the background that's just always looking out on your behalf, that's always making sure that it's taking your best interest at heart and just trying to provide smart recommendations.
Right? I like the concept of it being an advocate on your behalf. You mentioned scanning through your insurance quote. Those things become such overly complicated legal documents that it's almost impossible to get through it yourself. Are you using some sort of AI, like a chat GPT or something to consume that information and summarize it?
Yeah, we use a lot of AI in the company. With regards to that specifically, what we're doing is we're actually just partnering directly with a ton of insurance providers and a ton of platforms that are like aggregators for other providers, essentially trying to broaden the scope as much as possible and make sure that we're pinging every possible option. Something that I suffered from when I was shopping for insurance is that you put your information in to pull initial quotes, and then you're getting hammered with phone calls and hammered with emails, and you're just getting bombarded. And it just drove me crazy. It's so unpleasant personally. And so, what I really wanted to offer was a solution where your contact information is never shared, right? And we're just going to be fetching basic information about the property, about your current provider, about your premium, and so on. And we're comparing that to the other tools. And while we won't necessarily do all the fine grained analysis of the contract, we can essentially provide you with, hey, you know what? You have the best rate on the market. So there's really no point in even shopping. Or alternatively, you can take a look at this one option that if you were to switch to, you'd have a lower premium and lower deductible. Now, I don't know the specifics of that contract, and you'd have to get on the phone with that particular insurance agent to actually know. But at the very least, you aren't wasting your time and you aren't going to get bombarded with all these calls and emails.
Could you share an example of somebody who came to you with like what was one of your biggest wins for an individual that you could share here today?
Oh, Yeah, we've had some tremendous wins. I'm thinking of most recently, we actually have a wall, and some of our best agents, when they get a really, really large reduction, they'll print out the settlement agreement and they'll paste it on the wall and just kind of look at it and kind of boosts a little bit of that morale. But most recently, we had one complex. It was actually under construction, but the assessor decided to value it as if it was completed. It was only about 60% complete. And so they valued that commercial building, which was going to become a private school, at $6.5 million. We were able to get that down to 4.5, uh, just through the arguments that we talked about here. One of the things that kicked in was something in the Texas tax code that happens to short circuit increases of more than 20%. This particular property ended up dropping from 6.5 to just over $1 million in its assessment. And so we dropped that individual's tax bill massive.
That's awesome. And that is the difference between, this was a private school, but that could be a difference of whether that business can stay in business or not.
Oh, totally. I remember there was this one phone call that I took early on, and we had sent some marketing material out to Galveston County, which is over here near the bay. There was one elderly lady that gave me a call. She was just calling our main line, and I answered, and she said, I received this letter from you. Do you actually think you can get my tax assessment down to this level? Because, we just bought this condo and this is our retirement, and I can't afford this tax bill. This is the real tax bill. I'm going to have to sell this and move. And I remember pulling up her account and looking at that particular property and thinking, absolutely, we're going to win this case. She had added on that her husband was a veteran, her husband was disabled, and so on. And there's actually a ton of property tax exemptions that you can get if you're a senior,
Hmm.
you're a veteran, and if you're disabled. And I remember I was on the phone with her. I'm like, send me a photo of your license. I'm going to file your exemption for you. We filed everything. We ended up dropping her tax bill that year by 50%. And the nice thing about the senior exemption is that it locks in your tax bill where it can't go up anymore. It essentially freezes it forever. And so we locked her in, despite her fixed income, we locked in her tax bill and she's never going to have to worry about that again. And, when times get tough, sometimes I think about that phone call, makes me
Yeah.
feel.
Oh, that sounds extremely rewarding. That's awesome that you're able to do that. It's stunning how many people we just frankly don't know of these programs. Like that person probably didn't even know that they qualified for it, and your state and local government isn't freely going to be giving that information out.
That's right. That's why we launched as part of our, as part of serving as your tax agent, we'll file exemptions on your behalf and make sure you're taking everything you qualify for. Because it's boring, right? It's not a subject that people are eager to kind of pick up and learn about. And so from our perspective, if we can solve that problem for you, and put you in the best financial position, that's just a win-win.
Just to remind everybody, head over to ownwell.com to learn more information. And if the team there can help you with lowering your taxes and some of your expenses, it's ownwell.com. That's going to be a clickable link in the show notes. If you found some value in what we're talking about so far, do us a quick favor, share this with one of your investor friends. And if you're watching us on YouTube, give us a quick like and subscribe. So, Joseph, I have to ask you some questions around running this business now. This is a SaaS business. What has been the biggest challenge in launching this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's growing the team. Making sure that you can maintain your high bar for quality and reach out to candidates that are maybe looking at some other companies that are more well known, and they're saying, should I go to a company that I know is established and been around for 30 years? Or should I join a company that's only 4 or 5 years old where the future is uncertain? There could be massive upside, but who knows what would happen? That's always been the hardest challenge for us is finding amazing people and working with.
So, what are some of you seem to be an efficiency type of fella.
True.
We talked briefly before we hit record on some of the things that you've done to make things more efficient for yourself.
Yeah.
But what are some of the things that you've implemented in your business to help with this hiring process?
Yeah. For the hiring side specifically,
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I'm not necessarily sure that there's a silver bullet to hiring amazing people. We brainstorm all the time about, what are the traits, the specific traits that we're looking for. And we work tirelessly to create the right structure for our interviews to make sure that we're vetting for those things. While at the same time, I don't want to be burdensome. I don't want to make people jump through hoops just to prove that they're an amazing candidate. So striking that balance is always something that we're working on. I can't say necessarily that I really figured it out. It's a constant work in progress. And one thing that I can say is we have an amazing team. I'm really proud to work with them. I'm lucky to to work with them every day. And so something that we're doing here seems to be working, and hopefully we can continue it.
Well, if you don't mind me saying, it seems like you really enjoy this process.
Totally.
It Could you talk a little bit to, like, how that helps your mindset and helps you push through the challenging times?
Absolutely. I mean, like I talked about earlier, knowing that we're actually helping people, that we're making a difference to their wallet and making housing, which is something that is becoming more and more unaffordable, something that's attainable or something that you can keep. Personally, this might sound kind of cheesy, but when I was 5 years old, my dream was to one day be a homeowner and have my little house and to have my family in that house and to be able to take care and provide for them, right? Like the classic American dreams, immigrants. And, the American dream was something that I adopted early on that was kind of communicated to me. And so working in an industry where I'm helping make that attainable, helping people stay in their home is really fulfilling and rewarding. And on top of that, being involved in real estate, which is my family's business, and being able to be involved while still taking my expertise in technology and in software, be able to apply that there. I mean, I'm feeling pretty blessed to get to work in here.
So to kind of build on the efficiencies,
Yeah.
and it's typically something that we close out the show with as one of my rapid fire questions, but being the technical side of this, I'm sure that there's been a ton of efficiencies that you've added to your day-to-day processes.
Yep.
You talked about building out a little app to just go through
Oh
your
yeah.
emails. What Could you talk a little bit about that and the benefit that has had to you?
Yeah. Sure. So my email is pretty easy to find. And I get a lot. I get a lot of email every single day. I get anywhere from 300 to 500 emails a day. And it's burdensome. People have created tools to try to make it easier, but none of them really solved my problem, which is like, just get all the junk out of here and let me focus on what matters. And so recently I built a little tool, basically an AI bot that every single time I receive a new email, it reads my email for me. It decides whether it's something that's worth my time. And if it's not worth my time because it's some salesman trying to sell me some software that I don't really need, it just kind of automatically moves it into a separate inbox for me to review later. And that's been a huge blessing for my mornings and making every day a bit more palatable.
How much has it reduced? You said, let's say you do get 500 emails a day.
Yeah.
How
I
much
would
does
say
it
it filters out like 95% of my emails. I mean,
Oh,
it's
wow.
a lot of junk in there. I, maybe my email's too easy to find. But yeah, it definitely makes it more palatable.
Is that something that you're running on a local machine, or is that a web service of some kind as well?
Yeah, you can run it on my machine. I threw it up on like a little server in the cloud and it just kind of like constantly listens and classifies my email for me.
Sure. It's just interesting to be able to have the skill set in which to just solve your own problems to that level.
It's not something that I think is good enough that I would recommend it to anybody, but it solves my problem. Personal software.
There's a level of investment that you've made there, though, that when you were solving this problem, see a significant return. It goes back to what I've kind of preached quite a bit here on this show is that you need to start putting some value and maybe a dollar amount on your time and start to decide where you're going to start to make certain investments. You've made this investment to clear up your inbox, but the amount of time that has freed up for you is probably you probably can't calculate it at this point.
Totally agree. And, even more to your exact point about the importance of valuing your time, if freeing up a little bit more of your time allows you to make higher quality decisions in your day to day, I mean, it's very hard to put a dollar price on that.
Yeah. It's always interesting, and we as entrepreneurs have a tendency of wanting to do as much of it as possible, and we'll justify it as, "I'm saving all of this money." But in the end, is that the best return on that investment?
Agreed. Yeah. Nice thing about software, especially when you build it yourself, is it's pretty free, relatively speaking. Yeah. Every once in a while, tweak it, but I'm happy with
So,
it.
Have you had anything, like, completely freak out on you and you had to deal with the aftermath?
You know, the I always say this to the team, which is like, if you're not making mistakes, then you're not either doing enough or you're not trying to do enough things. That essentially, I want to see you program bugs because that means to me that you're trying to do things and you're trying to push forward progress. And so, all the time we'll have something where, we thought that there's some new way that we could write this algorithm. We try, it takes down the entire database. We're like, okay, roll that back. Let's get the database back up. So yeah, I'm a big believer in pushing the boundaries because that's kind of where you learn where the boundary is.
Sure. Well, if you had advice to give to somebody, they wanted to start their own SaaS business, what would you tell them? Where would they need to start?
Something that you find a problem that is in a space that you can get yourself excited about that maybe most people wouldn't. At the end of the day, you're going to have to become the expert in that space and you're going to have to push through and persevere during hard times. If you can find something that gets you excited, that you can really become passionate about, it makes it much easier to persevere when it's tempting not to.
Sure. As you've been doing this 10 years ago, you probably never thought of yourself building a platform that's saving people on their property taxes.
True.
You found that the more you've niched down to this level, the more, we keep hearing the phrase, there's riches in the niches.
Absolutely. It is such an interesting space. The more that I dive into it, the more, whether it's that I think that there's something that's broken that needs to be fixed, or whether it's like specific rules that if we can take advantage of can create a much better outcome for, let's say a particular type of property owner. It is just one of those things that, you crack it open and very few people in the world are probably paying attention to it. But since I am, I just see all these gaps and all these opportunities. And then that's probably the case with most things. I'm focused on property taxes right now.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sure if the topic is exactly interesting,
No,
but you found some interest in it.
absolutely.
So, one more time, I'm just going to direct everybody to ownwell.com. Head over there to see if Joseph's team can help you save you some expenses, whether it's property taxes, insurance, or I think there were some other mentions of additional bill reductions that you can maybe take advantage of.
Yeah.
Ownwell.com. And if you're ready, Joseph, we'll jump into some rapid fire questions as we close
Sure.
out the show.
Yeah, sounds good.
Well, first of all, here's a big one. What lie do business owners tell themselves and sometimes to others?
What lie? I think that sometimes we delude ourselves into thinking that something is a good idea and we intellectualize the idea without actually knowing that it's solving a problem. So I'd say that instead of thinking that something is a good idea, validate that and actually have somebody prove to you that it is a problem that they're suffering from.
Could you talk a little bit about, like, how did you go about that process with this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we got lucky with our initial kind of core business in that my co-founder had experienced that specific problem. And so he knew that this was something that the world needed. But, we spend all day, every day thinking about what else we can do. And sometimes in our head, we think, oh, this is such a phenomenal idea. People are going to love this. People need this. And then, we build out some prototype or some MVP and we put it in the hands of some of our customers, or we even have certain customers that are like our super customers. They love to play around with our new tools and they ask to be put on
Mhm.
these lists and they're like, nobody cares about this. And we realize that we could have invested way too much time or way too much energy because we got excited about something, but it doesn't actually resonate with people.
Do you have a book recommendation or what are you reading right now?
I recently finished Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell, and I thought it was phenomenal.
Fantastic book.
Yeah. I mean, it really opened my mind in some ways that I didn't realize. So I would highly
Yeah.
recommend that.
Yeah, he's brilliant. And it is a beefy book, so
Yes,
be prepared, but fantastic, fantastic guy. One of our I don't see we don't have the intellectuals of that level that he's one of the few that are still with us.
absolutely.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self, one piece of advice, what would that be?
Just continue to follow the things that you can get very excited and passionate about. and everything else will fall in place.
Do you have any additional strategies, process, or tools you've implemented that has had a big time saving impact to your business or yourself?
Yeah, I think the other one, it's related to some of the things that we've talked about already today, but it's like fail fast, right? I mean, try something, get the minimum out there, learn the lessons as early as you possibly can, because there's a much higher likelihood that you get to the right answer at the end of the day.
Well, Joseph, was there a question or concept you wish we would have covered here today?
I really enjoyed this conversation. It was actually a pleasure.
Well, I really appreciate your time. You brought a ton of value here today. Again, it is ownwell.com. That is, of course, going to be a clickable link in the show notes. But Joseph, I hope you'll come back again sometime. Maybe the next time you go into another market or release a new gadget.
Sounds good.
So, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jack.